Hello, Ryan Pelton here. This week's episode of the Ryan Files is a bit more controversial than past episodes. When I asked Damien Dumar if I could interview him for an episode, I told him that the Ryan Files looks at the world through a biblical lens. I also told him I wasn't having him on for a debate, so I gave him the floor. I wanted to hear what he had to say, and I wasn't disappointed. Damien's story in the book The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars is all very intriguing. By the time I launch this episode, I will have read the book, and Damien's agent has said that he would be willing to come on again to discuss everything. So enjoy this episode as it is. Many people in the world have different experiences, worldviews, opinions, and beliefs. On many things, Damien and I are on opposite ends of the spectrum. But it doesn't mean I can't listen and along the way gain some knowledge. If nothing else, the knowledge that is out there in the world. That being said, there are some really interesting points Damien makes. He certainly made me think about some things. And it's interesting, the parallels that somehow do exist between our two different paradigms. So let's dive in. Buckle up. Damien doesn't hold back. And along the way, consider that there may be more going on in this world than any of us realize. How would you feel if humanity received an eviction notice in the form of a death threat? Well, we did. The Georgia Guidestones, erected in Albert County, Georgia, anonymously in 1979, did just that. The monolithic structure took on a look similar to that of Stonehenge. Engraved on the stones were 10 neo-fascist commandments, politically spun into Orwellian instructions. And the first commandment reveals all the rest. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. The world's population today is 7.95 billion people, so what happens to the unfortunate 7.5 billion people who exceed the desired 500 million population? The Illuminati plan is in place, and it means systematic extermination. And that plan was carved in stone for all to see.
Are you not curious?
Preparing to transfer the Ryan files. Now.
I present to you, with great intrigue and wonder, the Ryan Files.
Folks, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Ryan Files. This week we have a special guest. I'm very excited about this. Got a chance to catch some of his content on YouTube, and I'm getting ready to read his book as soon as I finish this beast right here, Sidonia. It's a pretty deep read. But anyways, please welcome to the show the one, the only Damien Dumar, publisher of the book The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about this book. I mean, it's definitely kind of gaining momentum since it's been published and come out, and it's intriguing. I'm excited to read it because I can only imagine it goes a lot deeper than everything I've seen on YouTube so far.
Most definitely. The book is called The Last Harvest. It's written by Lucien Mars. I'm the publisher, Damien Dumar, and we can see on the cover there is a haunting picture of the Georgia Guidestones, which have been in the news not so recently because somebody blew them up. And they were, if I had to hazard a guess, they were probably very angry at the message that's inscribed on the Georgia Guidestones, which is the plan by the elites to eliminate the population by 90%, which would be genocide. Some may think that that's a difficult job given the billions of people that are on this planet. But when we watch the news and we see the specter of World War III really looming on the horizon, when we recognize that the United States Air Force has stated that by 2025, they will have full control over the weather and be able to initiate famines and droughts at will. And when we look at viral vectors as well, we all had experience recently with the pandemic and what that can bring. And after a while, when one puts all these vectors together and aggregates them, the idea of achieving a 90% population of the planet is really not so far-fetched at all. And this book, The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars, can be divided into two sections. The second half of the book is that which is not speculative, although some people could label it conspiratorial, But there's conspiracy theory and there's also conspiracy fact. And everything that is in the second half of the book is footnoted and quoted. It's not just pure speculation. So, for example, in the book, when it states that there are enough concentration camps in North America to hold 30 million people that are operated by FEMA, it's easy to prove because on Amazon you can get this book published by the Department of the Army that explains in great detail how they're going to operate them. So that's the second half of the book. So what is the first half of the book? Well, that's what could be considered speculative and probably what you most appreciate. Because the question, of course, comes up, well, if the elite are saying over and over that they want to reduce the population by 90%, and the year 2025 is the year that keeps coming up over and over as to when this operation will commence, the question comes up, well, why would they do that? That seems rather nasty and mean. So the answer to that, in short, is that it's the Nebu Gray extraterrestrials who are motivating the elite to pull off this plan of global genocide with the promise that if they pull it off, they will get to co-rule the planet with the Greys in some bright futuristic future. Of course, the reality is that the Greys will exterminate the elites as soon as they've done the dirty work, and the elites were not aware of that until this book was been published. So this book has actually pissed off a lot of people because nobody was supposed to know that this was what was going to happen. Okay. So when one starts talking about extraterrestrials, the first thought that comes in a lot of people's heads is, well, how do we know extraterrestrials exist? Can you prove they exist? Well, what I can prove to you is that NASA has published all these laws governing your interaction with extraterrestrials, and they are reprinted in the back of The Last Harvest. So if NASA is writing laws governing your interaction with extraterrestrials, it's a good chance that they actually are real, because otherwise, why would you write these laws? And even if you don't believe in extraterrestrials, the elite who are planning your genocide do. So it's important to take this into account. But nonetheless, when we talk about extraterrestrials, this opens up a whole can of worms. Basically, well, what are all these extraterrestrial groups? Where did they come from? What do they have to do specifically with this planet and the history of this planet? What was their role in genetically engineering human beings, et cetera, et cetera? So one has to cover all of these topics in order to provide a framework with which to really view what is not speculative and verifiable fact, or else that which is verifiable fact seems so outlandish that one almost doesn't believe it, no matter how much evidence is there. But when looked at in this big exopolitical perspective, it sort of starts to make sense. So everything that's in the first half of the book, all that information is information that no one's ever heard before. So if someone's interested in reading about extraterrestrials and is tired of reading the same old palaver left and right, this is all new stuff that you've never heard anywhere else before. And some people would say, well, how do we know that this is true? Where did this information come from? And before I answer that, I would say that when one reads this book, it will make sense when all is said and done in a way that has never made sense before. Pieces will fall together that never fell together before. And I think that that in many ways stands on its own, because clearly I have no way of really proving to you a lot of the extraterrestrial information that's in the first half of the book. And nobody can really prove that. Anyone who has ever written a book on extraterrestrials cannot necessarily prove it. You can't go on Amazon and get a book by the government that says, hey, yeah, extraterrestrials exist. This is correct. So we're all operating in a space that is based very much on intuition or what resonates with you, which brings me to another very important subject, which is that one of the main reasons this book was written was to target individuals who are abductees, or as they call them now, experiencers, people with Rh negative blood, people who are hybrids, people who are extraterrestrial in nature, who came into this matrix reality for reasons unknown and maybe are trapped here, maybe trying to find a way back. So a lot of the information that's in this book will resonate with them, because when they hear about certain aspects, let's say, of the reptilian Siakar empire, on some level, they will feel like, oh, that sounds familiar. They'll have a feeling of, oh, that's my home, or whatever the civilization is that's mentioned in the book. And so the idea is to not so gently wake people up, because the book is a very dark book. It's not a love and life book. It's not a book like David Icke's many telephone book sized books, where he covers a lot of things that are factual and true and accurate, but then his takeaway is, well, we're all infinite consciousness, so it's okay. But we're not infinite consciousness, because if we were, we would be able to very easily see with our own eyes the shape-shifting reptilians that he is always talking about. So right there, you can't be infinite consciousness if your genetic vehicle has been limited through genetic engineering by those who keep you into the matrix prison to begin with. But it's an easy way out for David Icke, because he's of the light and he's used to assuaging people's uneasiness with topics that are, well, dark in nature. And many things are dark in nature, but people are raised on the steady diet of films where the hero always wins in the end. You know, Will Smith and his son and some A-team machinations were able to defeat an extraterrestrial empire. And that made me feel good to people watching the films, but the reality is not like that. The reality is not a feel-good reality. So I think that's a good overall picture of what the book is about and what the intent, or at least one of the main intents behind the publication of the book is. So probably the next thing that immediately you're going to ask, or people in the audience are thinking, is, what is this Rh negative blood stuff? What are you talking about? Very interesting. And the Rh negative blood factor is a factor which scientists have said or confirmed is not native to this planet, which is a way of saying it's extraterrestrial, but in a politically correct way. I didn't say it was extraterrestrial. I just said it's not native to this planet. We don't know. But it is, in fact, extraterrestrial. And while the book, The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars, goes into great detail about the history of Rh negative blood and precisely where it came from, the short answer for the purposes of this podcast is that those who have the Rh negative blood factor, and it's about 10% of the world population, are genetically related to the survivors of the fall of Atlantis. So the ruling class of Atlantis, they had that blood marker, and that has gone down throughout the bloodlines, you could say, because almost every king and queen has had Rh negative blood. Many presidents of the United States have had Rh negative blood. Those who marry into royal families, like I'm sure if you checked Meghan Markle's blood, it would be Rh negative as well, the way she wouldn't be in the position where she is. Now, I haven't confirmed that, but I'm going to assume that based on how these things work. Those who are high-ranking members of the Illuminati, the Freemasons, or what have you, also Rh negative blood. And individuals who have Rh negative blood are the #1 target for alien abduction. So, for example, when I spoke in Vegas at a big alien abductee conference, everyone in attendance in the room that I was in my audience, was all Rh negative. Wow. So it's only 10% of the planet, but in a huge abductee, it's 100% of those in attendance. They're all there. And interestingly, so are Freemasons and Illuminati also looking to recruit a lot of these people. So why is Rh negative blood, or maybe I should say to retrieve some of these people? It's hard to really say, because those who have Rh negative blood have probably been abducted and probably been hybridized. And the reason people, when they're abducted, are abducted over and over again, even if they may not remember it, is because they are an ongoing project. They have been hybridized since very young already, so their genetics are even more hybridized than would be considered normal, because all human beings can theoretically be considered hybrids due to the genetic engineering that was done to them. But there's hybridization, and then there's hybridization. And when it comes to the land of the extraterrestrials, the two of the most important resources are genetic materials and genetic engineering and weapons technology, because these resources are what enables extraterrestrial civilizations to compete with other extraterrestrial civilizations over limited resources. Because contrary to the popular belief that out there in in the galaxy everyone is in peace or coexisting happily. This is not the case. It is endless warfare and struggle for resources. And while the elite on this planet will often talk about the planet being overpopulated, in reality, it's not. We are far from overpopulated. But if you go to other extraterrestrial planets and solar systems and galaxies, you will see real overpopulation. And the lifespans of extraterrestrials is very, very long. A gray alien can live for 20,000 years. A verdant can live for 60,000. Many extraterrestrials of a certain class are what you would consider technologically immortal, because you can transfer the consciousness or the spirit from one a genetically engineered biological form to another. So they don't have this truncated lifespan like a human does, which allows a human to basically never acquire any sort of wisdom or understanding, because by the time they begin to figure anything out, it's game over. And that was done on purpose by design. So you can imagine when you have a very large, ever-growing population of such long-lived extraterrestrials, the idea of looking for resources becomes even more pressing than it would be on a planet like this, where the overpopulation is largely an illusion used to justify extermination and warfare. So if someone is wondering if they have Rh negative blood, or if they feel they've been abducted, or and maybe they don't remember being abducted, but perhaps when they look back on their life, it's hard for them to remember much of anything that happened. These are all signs of memories being wiped and things like that. One can go on Amazon and one can easily purchase a mail-in blood test where you prick your finger and you put it on a card and mail it in, and they will tell you all about your blood. And one of the factors they will tell you in the report is if you're Rh negative or not. When I was born, which was 1971, they had this information on the birth certificates and on the doctor's writings, but there was no computerization back then. Now they don't talk about it, but it doesn't mean they're not recording it or keeping it in a centralized database or sharing it with the parties who would be interested in it, but they sort of keep people in the dark about it. So if one is curious if they have Rh negative blood, they can easily get a test, probably $15 it costs. And if it turns out they are Rh negative, then they may want to look a lot more seriously into the idea that they may have been abducted or hybridized. And certainly a lot of the information that I'm talking about, or the information that's in The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars, should they read the book or listen to the awesome audiobook we have of it, this information may resonate with them even stronger, because chances are they're probably not from here. They're just trapped in it, because this is a matrix reality.
Very interesting. Now, I am, and I'll just throw it out there, and I know this from my time in the military, I'm A negative. So Rh negative blood. And
you are most in demand. If you're A negative and Rh negative, then those extraterrestrials really love you.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to, yeah. But what does, I mean, does that in any way come into play in just your normal life at all? Is there any correlation between, maybe you're not being abducted or whatever, but is there something that resonates with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you may not have memories of abduction, but that doesn't mean you weren't abducted, because you can easily have your memories wiped, or you could have false screen memories implanted. The technology, when we talk about extraterrestrials, it's important to understand that the technology is in many cases several 100 million years more advanced than ours. These are orders of magnitude that are really hard to wrap one's head around. So the idea that one can be abducted by teleportation from your bedroom at night, that's child's play. It sounds like, oh, you watch too much Star Trek, but that's actual technology, and it's old hat, actually. So it's not difficult to be abducted, to have your memories wiped, to be worked on and not remember it. This is not something out of the ordinary, really, at all. I think people who are Rh negative also, they tend to hang out with and associate with others like them. So probably if you looked at your immediate friend group who you're close with or have some connection to, probably a lot of them are also a little bit like you. In some ways, you may feel you're different. You may all feel like you're different. There's something about you, the way you think, the way you operate, you're different. Maybe you feel that on some level that you are rejected by other people, even if you are extremely popular. Like maybe everyone around you in your neighborhood thinks you're awesome and the coolest person. But if you think about it on some level, they sort of wary or rejecting of you in some way. And that's natural because you're not really the same species. They know there's something wrong, but they don't know what it is, but they can feel it. So they, even if they really like you and think you're attractive or awesome company, there's something that's always throwing them off. Also, people who have, especially who have been hybridized, they often have abilities that would sort of fall into the category of, well, like an X-Men type of character. I don't mean that claws jump out of your hands like Wolverine, but those were all modifications. Wolverine had special healing ability, as that was why they could even do that operation on him in the comic book. So people who have Rh negative blood, for example, can often heal at maybe alarming rate. They can regenerate parts that were removed internally. Sometimes you'll meet people and they say, oh, I can influence the clouds with my thinking. And you say, oh, yeah, okay, you're smoking a lot of pot. But then you watch, you're like, wait, they actually can do that. That's really weird. How come they can do that? I knew one person who was in this category, and he could touch people and electrocute them. And I didn't even, it's not like I didn't believe him, but of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I've never experienced it, so how do I know? And one day we're walking down the street, and he touches me, and I nearly got knocked unconscious from the electric shock. And I was like, oh, wow. And he's like, oh, did I just do that? I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, that's what I was telling you about. I can't control it. I don't know why it works, but it's very embarrassing because sometimes I touch people and they get all shocked like this. And he would be, where you met him, he would look like completely as normal as can be, nice person, productive in society, and obviously doesn't tell many people about this unless he shocks them and has to explain it. And how do you even explain it? He doesn't know how he got that way. But the answer is hybridization. And one of the reasons that people who are Rh negative and hybridized often hang out together as friend groups and run into each other and have this strange connection is because they are all part of a batch consignment. They were usually abducted together as children, and they just don't remember it. So they're always coming back to each other in some kind of strange way. And this is an issue because also people who are abducted and hybridized, many times they don't necessarily feel like their life is their own, in the sense that they feel like maybe they have a little less control over their life than other people around them, the normies, appear to have in their own life. And the reason for that is because their extraterrestrial handlers who've hybridized them and who continue to abduct them, they look at them as property, and they are exercising their influence on what you do. You're like an investment. They want to protect the investment. They don't want you to take up a habit, maybe like skydiving, and jeopardize their investment. I'm making this up halfway to be entertaining, but it's completely the reality of how it is. So many people who are in this situation, they often know something's wrong, and maybe they're looking for a way out. They ask the question, not so much who am I, but what am I? Or the deeper question is, well, what is my purpose in creation? Where do I belong? And this gets even more confusing because human beings have these ideas about reality that are completely false and are put into the matrix and the education system to confuse people. So, for example, when people look at the idea of evil, they think, oh, evil is all just bad, or the dark is bad, but that's not the case. One requires light and dark in a creation in order for it to operate. So the question really is not so much if a being is light or dark, but the question is really, is their will in alignment with that of the Creator, the Divine Father? which, and when I talk about that, I'm not talking about any religious concept. I have nothing to do with any type of human religion or anything like that, because they're all created to keep people separated from the creator. Because one doesn't need a religion to establish a relationship with your creator. That's just ridiculous, this idea. And religion is very convenient because not only does it create that separation, but then it creates warfare based on that separation. And warfare is one of the activities that feeds the matrix in terms of energy. So people ask a lot of times, well, what is the matrix? You hear people like Andrew Tate going on the internet and saying, oh, the matrix is persecuting me because I'm teaching men to be masculine. The matrix does not really care about these sorts of things, and you're not being persecuted by the matrix. Or Elon Musk will say, who's another piece of work who wants to put chips into people's head, which we'll get into later. He'll say, oh, we're living in a simulation. And David Icke will talk about this idea of a matrix as well. And they're all not wrong. There's truth to it. But the question is, well, what exactly is the matrix? And for people who are interested in that sort of topic, there are two books I'll mention here so that people can read about what I'm saying, because what I'm about to say will seem extremely outrageous to them. So the first book is called The Ringmakers of Saturn. It's by an author called Norman R. Bergrun. And the other would be Saturn, The Secrets of the Extraterrestrial Engineers by Panay Andov. And what these books cover is the fact that NASA sent up 2 Voyager missions and then many years later a Cassini mission to explore the outer regions of the solar system. And what they discovered is that the rings of Saturn are entirely artificial and are being assembled and maintained and perpetually growing as a result of the labors of extremely large extraterrestrial craft that build these rings. So, and they have the evidence of this, and they just don't go on to Fox News and tell you about it. And then the other very important concept is that they realize that based on their technical analysis, that the planet Saturn acts as an actual transmitter that's transmitting all kinds of frequencies and data, much like a radio station broadcasts. And so the planet Saturn is actually the mechanism by which the matrix reality that we live in on this planet is broadcast. And human beings are genetically modified specifically to tune into that broadcast and not see beyond it. So, for example, a reptilian, their eyes are capable of seeing literally into the 4th and 5th dimensions, whereas you can't see past the 3rd. Therefore, you are effectively blind to what is going on around you. So when I say that warfare produces energy that is fed upon, if one had eyes that could see into the 4th and 5th dimension, then if one went onto battlefields in the Ukraine or the Normandy beach invasion, you would see all of the entities and technology that is present in the other dimensions that is harvesting the energy of all the death and suffering and fear and pain, because it's fuel that can be lived upon, and it's the human beings live in. Well, human beings, they think of themselves as the top of the food chain. They say, oh, look at this massive slaughterhouse. I have 100,000 head of hogs in here, and we kill this many per month. But humans don't realize that they are the livestock. They're not at the top of the food chain. And what's diabolical about this matrix is that when you die, you just get reincarnated right back into the system. So it's like you get to eat the hamburger and the hamburger just comes back. So this is the real diabolical reality of what we'll call human beings find themselves stuck in. So when films like The Matrix are made, they sugarcoat it. Oh, you're in a nice, safe, warm tank, and your bioelectricity is used as a battery to power computers, and you're just having a great dream. No, it's far darker than that. And of course, the question is, well, who is behind the Matrix? Well, Saturn is another name for Satan. So when one talks about Satan, people always think about the Bible, and they have this sort of mystical, spiritual, almost like, oh, like Joe Rogan would say, oh, I don't even know if he exists or something like this, you know? And meanwhile, he's wearing satanic t-shirts, hanging out with Anton LaVey's son. And, you know, it's like, okay, who are you fooling there? this is incidentally why Elon Musk renamed Twitter X, which makes no sense from a business point of view until you realize that X is another symbol for Saturn. It's why Elon Musk wears a Baphomet costume. It's not because he's LARPing, it's because he's flying the flag, and he wants to put chips into people's heads because that is part of the plan. And he's not the only one doing this. British Telecom is attempting the same thing, and their name for the actual project is called Soulcatcher 2025. So again, the number 2025 keeps coming up. And if someone doesn't believe this, they can go into Google when they're done watching this and look up British Telecom Soulcatcher 2025, and you'll hear all about it from the official sources. And this idea of putting a chip into someone's head is really one of the worst ideas, because it's the final level of becoming eternally enslaved to the matrix. Because the moment you, out of your own free will, because we live in a creation and not a clockwork, choose to give up your free will by putting a chip in your head, you're done. And there's no coming back from it, because this is what you chose. And this is important to talk about this now, because during the pandemic, there was always the situation where people, if they didn't get a vaccine, they wouldn't be allowed to have a job. If you were in Europe, you wouldn't be allowed to go to the grocery store to get food. And then when it was all over, Anthony Fauci said, well, what are you all complaining about? No one forced you to get a vaccine. And people got so angry. What do you mean no one forced me? I wouldn't get a job or food if I didn't get a vaccine. What he meant is no one held you down and forced a vaccine on you. And he's not wrong, because there are certain things that you just never want to do. Like if it came down to putting a chip in your head or taking a gun and blowing your brains out, you should blow your brains out, because you're not going to be punished for killing yourself, but you will be punished for damning your soul by putting a chip in your head. So what's more important, your body or your soul? Your body is just a vehicle. Who cares about it? You're going to die anyway. So sooner than you think. You only live 100 years at best. But this idea that in the future people will be confronted with this pressure to implant chips and become something like they like to call transhumanistic is going to be very, very strong. And at that point, human beings will have to make that decision. And it's because these events are rapidly approaching us that it was very important that this book, The Last Harvest, be written so people understand the full picture and they can make the correct choices going forward. And some people may say, well, what is the what can one do? What is the takeaway? And what I always say is pray. And I don't mean that in a religious way, in any way, shape, or form. I just mean, just like I'm talking to you now, you can reach out to the Divine Father, acknowledge his existence, say, what is my place in your creation? Am I light or dark? How do I align my will with yours? I don't want to be in rebellion against you and your creation. Where should I go? Where do I belong? I don't want to be a part of this matrix anymore. I don't want a chip in my head. I reject and renounce all these religions. There's no such thing as a savior. It's all about my free will and my relationship with the Father. And how do I get out of this matrix? I don't want to be here anymore. And this is the best that one can do. And when I say this, people, they just keep asking, but what can we do? There's this incredible resistance to reaching out. And the reason why there's such resistance to reaching out to the Divine Father is because Satan hates him and created this matrix in part to spite him. So you are being constantly inundated with this idea that somehow the creator, the Divine Father, there's something wrong with him, or you should be in rebellion, or he's not doing a good job, whatever it is. You see it all over the place in movies here and there. And so people have internalized this resistance. And it's important that they become conscious of where this comes from so they can then make the decision, well, I reject this. Where did these thoughts come from? Why do I think this? Because so many things that people think, they never question where it came from. They never say, where did this idea come from? Why is this idea in my head? Is this even true? They just like robots going through a spell. And it's not entirely their fault, because as The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars points out in great detail, human beings were genetically engineered to be enslaved. So the way that this was done in brief is that when Lucifer, who is another Alpha Draconian classified reptilian, was working with Satan, because they're two different beings, contrary to what is often taught in religious stories. When he was doing the genetic re-engineering of human beings, he was taking the ape-like hominids who were on this planet, and he was hybridizing their genetics with that of reptilians of different species to produce the different races. But when he did it, he used the genetic material of dead reptilians. So human beings, as we'll call them in quotes, technically can be classified as undead, which is probably one of the reasons that people are obsessed with zombie films, because it's really themselves they're looking at. Even George Romero, who's the director who created the entire genre, said he created it not to create horror films. He was spoofing how he viewed human beings. Maybe he was Rh negative and looking at it from the outside on some level himself. I do not know. But human beings, they have this component to them that is coming from dead genetic material. And what that did was it created what psychologists and psychiatrists would call the unconscious mind. So everyone knows about the unconscious mind. There are all these self-help books on it. It's nothing new, but the question is, well, where did it come from? Well, The Last Harvest tells you in great detail where it came from, and it's something that's unique to humans on this planet. And it puts people in a position where they can be manipulated so easily. Another way that human beings can be easily manipulated that is genetic is that inside the dura mater of the skull is a very fine crystalline matrix, which acts as much like crystal radio kit. If anyone ever built one of those when they were young, crystal radio, it's the same thing in your head, which enables people to easily be tracked, influenced, to fall into groupthink, like when you have the Nuremberg rallies or a Trump rally and everyone is screaming mindlessly about something. Even sports games, like sometimes one looks at them and says, wow, what's going on there? So what's curious is that if someone was born with forceps delivery and the skull was damaged from the forceps, then that crystalline lattice work has been damaged, and these individuals are often not susceptible to these phenomenon. So, for example, when I was delivered with forceps when I was a baby, and so my whole life I always looked at sporting events and all these things very strange. I could never understand why people are acting the way they did. Okay, people throwing a ball around. Okay, why are you so excited about it? So, a lot of people who feel the way I feel and feel like outsiders on some level, even if it doesn't bother them because everyone's always talking to them about sports and they don't know what to say. Perhaps you were delivered with forceps, or maybe you had an injury in your head when you were young that damaged this, and you're better off for it, because a lot of people who've had serious head injuries often turn around and start spiritually awakening, in quotes. We won't define what that is, but loosely, if I had to use words to point in the right direction, I think would be my best bet. They suddenly find themselves questioning everything around them. Maybe that's another way to say it. And that's because this control mechanism is broken, and they're looking around going, what is all this? So these are some examples. So I know I've been talking nonstop, but it's just the book is so filled with information. It's so difficult for many people to digest, which is why I do podcasts like this, and why I have uploaded seminars that I've given at abductee seminars to YouTube, so people will have a kind of structure or framework already in place when they read the book, because they're going to be overloaded enough for what they're reading and have to put the book down. And many people don't ever finish the book or even get anywhere near through it. And I'm sort of trying to make it less probable that happens by putting all this out there. And whether people agree with me or not, it's fine. If people don't want to believe it, that's cool. I'm just here to give information. I don't like to argue with people or debate them, and I'm not here to save anyone. I'm not trying to create a religion or anything like this. It's just, it is what it is, and hopefully the information resonates with the people that are most meant to hear it, specifically Rh negatives, abductees, people who are not really human, but they're walking around in a human body, even if they don't remember that that's what happened to them.
Right. This is all fascinating because as I listen to even just this conversation, plus the stuff that I've already watched online, I'm so excited to read this book. There's just a lot of pieces to the puzzle that seem to, through other research, other topics, and definitely from different worldviews. But you can kind of see some connections. And, the bottom line is, there seems like there's a a target in the near future that so many things are pointing towards.
Yes.
And, just the simple fact of, like the Georgia Guidestones, I grew up in Georgia, is, and that they were destroyed. And I know what they said. And you start mixing in these things with the aliens, the alien presence, the disclosure events that are slowly being rolled out, the way that we've been, basically programmed over the past 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever years to be ready for this alien invasion coming or whatever. You get into all this, and it feels like there's a glue that connects all of this stuff.
Yes.
And I really feel like in some ways your book is going to kind of help glue those pieces together. That's why I'm really excited to listen to it. I do have a couple questions I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And let me just throw in one thing about what you just said. It's important because the enemy throws out enormous amounts of disinformation. So at a certain point, many people give up. They say, I don't know what is what. So if someone comes up with a conspiracy fact, suddenly on the market will appear 20 or 30 other conspiracy theories that are so absurd that they kind of drowns out the conspiracy fact. And you end up being placed in that same category as some of the other crazy people. So if someone says, well, when I saw the buildings come down on September 11th, I see that's a controlled demolition. And I've seen plenty of controlled demolitions. That's a controlled demolition. That doesn't sound too outrageous, but then other people suddenly will come out and say, oh, well, the planes were holograms and they were radio controlled and they were actually, and some of the theories become so absurd that after a while, it just becomes like anyone who thinks anything other than the official story is a loon. So even if you point out a simple fact like, well, if you pour any type of fuel on top of a steel beam and light it up, nothing happens. The beam doesn't melt. Oh, no, 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 no. I don't want to hear that. You're a nut. You probably believe that the towers were teleported to the moon, and it's just how it goes. So you're correct. It's important to have a structure like The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars provides, where it's almost like you can compare everything else against it and say, how does it fit in or how does it not? And it helps you sort of guide your way through the stories, especially as things unfold in a very accelerated manner. And one really has to start making decisions. In the past, it's easy to kind of put one's head into the sand and be an ostrich and say, oh, I don't want to hear about those FEMA camps. But the time will come when you can't put your head in the sand because you will be in the FEMA camp.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, right, it's very important now to listen to this type of information. But I didn't mean to distract from your questions. I just wanted to
great points.
Reinforce what you said. Right.
Great points. And, it's so interesting. As you said, you felt like, especially in the first part of the book, there's certain things that you can't prove per se, but there are things that you can later on. But you have to give credit. If there's enough, and this is in a court of law, if there's enough circumstantial evidence, you can make a case. Because one thing, no, two things, no. But you start piling on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things. You can make a case in a court of law based upon circumstantial evidence and just observation.
Sure.
Like you just pointed out, yeah. The simple observation is the fuel could have never got hot enough to melt the beams. That's not me making a statement of what I believe. That's just a scientific fact,
Right.
that is immutable. And so, if it couldn't have melted beams, then something else had to happen, Sherlock
Right.
Holmes. But anyways, you talked about Saturn, and it's very interesting. I want to learn more about Saturn for sure, just because there's some interesting things going on there. What's your thoughts on the hexagonal storm at the North Pole? Just does that in any way connect to any of this?
Yeah, actually, it's if you take the book Saturn, The Secret of the Extraterrestrial Engineers, the author goes into great detail about the nature of that structure. One thing important to remember about planets is that they're all hollow on the inside, including this one. So one of the reasons that flat earther theory has become this rage on the internet where everyone talks about that the earth is flat, is a kind of psyop or counterintel to keep people away from the reality, which is that the planet's hollow on the inside, and that's why no one is allowed into Antarctica after the Antarctic treaty was signed. Like, why would all the nations of the world that are in constant competition with one another all agree not to go into Antarctica when there's a promise of resources there? Well, it's because the extraterrestrials who live inside there will kill you if you do that. So they know we're not going to go there. Although Iran recently did threaten to go to the Antarctic, saying that they're not a part of the treaty. But good luck with that, because what's waiting for you in there is not going to tolerate this sort of behavior. And we have stories of Admiral Byrd who flew into the hollow earth, and there's many tales of this nature in mythology, and the reality is, like, yeah, there is an entire world inside the planet, and not only that, but under the ground there are endless underground military bases with maglev trains that crisscross the planet. There's so much inside the planet, under the oceans. Most of the extraterrestrial spacecraft that people cite are actually coming from under the ocean. That's where they're entering and leaving from. They're not coming from outer space, because all those spacecraft are cloaked. So this planet right now is surrounded with spacecraft, but they're all cloaked. You can't see them. But the ones you see, that's like the junk technology that the Greys gave Eisenhower in exchange for the right to abduct human beings. And Eisenhower just said, yeah, I'll speak on behalf of everyone else. I'll sign off on it. And the Greys went to the Russians and pulled the same stunt, and pretty soon they're abducting millions of people. And the elite have technology that seems impressive to them, but is actually primitive and useless in the grand scheme of things. It's sort of like when the first settlers on North America purchased Manhattan Island from the Indians for a bunch of beads and trinkets, and the Indians had no idea what was going on. They thought, oh, beads and trinkets. And so the Greys effectively purchased the right to abduct human beings from the world leaders in exchange for things they would have thrown in the garbage, probably.
Right.
This is what happened.
Right. Coming up, next year, 2025, obviously there's some people that believe September 20th, 2025 is a date that will live in infamy.
Right.
With all the secret societies, Freemasons, Illuminati, Skull and Bones, you name it. What should we be looking for now out there? What are the telltale signs that we might be able to observe, see? And how do you feel the next year is going to kind of roll out, in your opinion, based upon your book and just other research that you've done?
Right. Well, yeah, it's the book I published. I'm not the author, just to clarify that. But a lot of people confused by that. It's not that common for a publisher to speak in the place of the author, but dealing with book tours and endless podcasts it can be exhausting. And I happen to, being that I edited this book, and my own personal life experience is very connected to the material that's in this book, being Rh negative myself, abductee, hybridized. It was only natural that I, with my background, would be doing something like this. So I think reading The Last Harvest is one of the best ways to really keep your eyes open to what's coming, because once you read the book and you've really read it, you just look on the news that's coming through your search engine, through the aggregators, and all these stories will pop out that will fit into the framework. You will see things unfold. It's really quite shocking. So that's one way to keep an eye out for what's coming. And then as far as what the next year will bring, well, first of all, we have the election in November of 2024, and I really can't see it ending in a positive way, shall we say, because whether Trump wins or not, somehow the deck is stacked in such a way that he can always claim again that he was cheated out of the election, get it passed to Congress, get it passed to the Supreme Court. He stacked the judges in his favor. He ends up being president anyway. And regardless, if he gets elected, if he doesn't, if he cheats his way in there, there is so much built up in this country that no matter what happens, we're looking at a potential civil war or something breaking out. And this is very much, oh, nice cat.
Oh, excuse my kitty. I've got 4.
That's fine.
I've got 4.
Mine was on my lap too. You just can't see it because the camera's too high.
Yes.
And then, when we combine into this, we have the looming specter of World War III. The situation in the Ukraine is not de-escalating in any way, shape, or form. The situation in the Middle East is not de-escalating in any way, shape, or form. And the situation in the Far East with China and Taiwan, that hasn't even begun to kick off, and North Korea. So we can start to see these events accelerating. And yes, September 20th, 2025 is the date upon which Satan returns, in a sense, to claim this place as this matrix, and what that will entail exactly, it's not going to be fun to find out. So, and even another reason why people should read The Last Harvest and start praying. And again, I don't mean that in a religious way. And how that date was determined by Lucien Mars is that there are articles on it that have been reprinted on thelastharvest.info that explain it, and it has to do with the specific type of reptilian computer coding and mathematics that's used to generate the matrix. And when one analyzes these things, which is not that easy for a human being to do, because you see a reptilian brain, when it looks at like what's considered the Kamiya of Saturn, which is a numerical cube with numbers in it, the reptilian brain automatically projects it into multiple dimensions, which a human brain can't. So it actually sees an entire code system in computers and can calculate based on it, whereas to us, we just, it's a box with a bunch of numbers. So if someone's capable of reading and decoding this kind of data, then one comes up with the September 20th, 2025 as the date. So this, again, is a prediction that's not far off. It is literally maybe slightly more than a year, because we're already in September 11th, 2024. So it's about a year. We'll see. So if someone hears this and says, wow, that's a pretty extreme claim, well, it won't take you long to find out whether it's true or not. And again, when I say that Satan returns, it's not necessarily like he's going to appear with a top hat and a cane on the morning news and announce to everyone. It may not be completely obvious what's going on, but for those who have heard this or read the article or read the book, they will know, oh, this is the event that really marks what's going to happen. It could even be something like a nuclear strike on New York City. And New York City already has for a long time been talking about what to do in the event of a nuclear attack. Do they know something that we don't? They had already September 11th there. Why not a nuclear attack? What people don't realize, unless you read The Last Harvest, is that there are so many executive orders in place that any president at any time for any reason can declare a state of emergency, martial law, and take away literally all your rights, like all of them. They can take you and put you in a labor camp and force you to work, do whatever they want, confiscate all your property, and it's all there in writing. And if someone doesn't believe me, in The Last Harvest, all of these executive orders are reprinted. And one can look them up. They've never been repealed. They're just waiting for an event to happen. So it could very well be that on September 20th, 2025, that a nuclear device goes off in New York City, and whoever's president at the time uses that as this is the moment and declares this state of emergency, initiates all these executive orders, and next thing you know, you're being shipped off to a FEMA camp, or who knows what's going to be happening. And the party just begun. So while one doesn't know exactly how things will play out, if one has read The Last Harvest or listened to the audiobook, one will certainly see it unfolding in real time as fast as they can see it, and they'll have an idea about what's coming. So and again, this is a dark book. This future is not escapable. It can be delayed if people make certain decisions, which they're clearly not. So it's something that is inevitable in the grand scheme of events. And what's important is that each individual on their own uses their free will in such a manner to maximize their chances for a future that they would like, as opposed to one that they will not like. So having a chip inside your head and being a perpetual slave to Satan, or a robot in a machine, this is not something I think any sane person would sign up for. I think a lot of people would prefer rather to be pulled out of the matrix, or to go home to where they came from, or find themselves on a different planet, in a different form, perhaps, that would be more conducive to a brighter future. But again, that's up to people. So I've said in other podcasts before, people are always looking for a life coach, they're looking for an Indian guru, they're looking for whatever. And what better resource than the being that created you? I think, and certainly he can direct you to whatever would be most appropriate for you. And maybe there is some individual who you get pushed into that direction. Some people may read a book like The Last Harvest and they feel that they resonate more with the Galactic Federation than they do the Reptilian Seokar Empire. Some may feel they resonate more with the Magians. Who knows? Everyone's different, but the idea is to follow your feeling about what's resonating with you, and to enlist help from the highest source there is, and take it from there. And some people would say, well, this and that. And I would respond to them by saying, listen, you are going to be faced with this choice sooner or later anyway, because even if the elite weren't going to exterminate you, even if there's not going to be an extraterrestrial invasion, even if Satan wasn't returning in September 20th, 2025, you're still going to die pretty soon. You don't live very long, and you're still faced with the same problem. It's just more pressing now. Right. So it's really nothing to be alarmed about. And some people say, oh, but my kids, they won't survive. Well, what about my kids' future? Well, your kids aren't really your kids anyway. You don't own them. They have their own free will. Their fate is not your fate. Right. A parent may choose something completely different than what the child chooses. Yeah. So it's a lot of this is just part of the way humans think and process things emotionally, but it's not necessarily the way other beings process.
I got you, man.
Life.
This has been brilliant, and I'm excited to get this book. Like I said, I got to finish this puppy right here, but I am definitely going to get it. Maybe afterwards we'll talk again. I just think it's brilliant, all this information. And I'm hoping that the people who listen to this podcast will perhaps go out. Where can people follow you, get the book, follow the book, I guess, maybe, your publishing and whatnot, The Last Harvest by Lucy and Mars. Give me all the information.
Well, the easiest place for people to get the book, and especially the audiobook, which is really incredible narrator, is Amazon. But the audiobook is actually, I think, in every single distribution channel there is. So wherever you can get an audiobook, you'll find The Last Harvest somewhere there. I know a lot of people don't like to read anymore. They like to listen to books while they drive or on the treadmill. That's fine. As long as you get the information inside of you, it's fine. thelastharvest.info is my website that contains links to all other social media, every other occurrence. There's many podcasts floating around, but one can find my YouTube channel there, everything else. And again, if someone wants to reach out to me, they can always email me through that website, and I'm pretty easy to reach. And
awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. And like I said, folks, get the book, read it with me. We'll talk about it. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, Damien Dumar.
Thank you for having me.
The Georgia Guidestones were destroyed in an explosion on July 6, 2022. The perpetrator was never found, and the site was never rebuilt. But their message lives on to this day. Something doesn't feel right in the world. That's what my gut tells me. And I've learned to listen to that intuition over the years, and it served me well. Do I believe everything that Damien Dumar talked about? Do I believe everything in this book by Lucy and Mars. No, I don't. But to be fair, I'm going to read the book before coming to a final conclusion. I want to understand the world I'm living in. What's really going on? In fact, you might say I'm curious about it all. Thank you for tuning in this week to the Ryan Files. Your support is so important, friends. Your likes, your shares, your subscriptions, becoming an agent, all these things matter and make this channel possible. Just taking that extra second to give a thumbs up or write a comment below the video is huge. I can't thank you enough. You bless me. If you're new to the community, stop over to theryanfiles.com and join us by becoming an agent. We can't wait to welcome you to this place where curiosity meets action. Have an amazing week. Tell your friends about our channel and be nice to a total stranger. And above all, stay curious out there, and I will see you right here next week on The Ryan Files.
The Ryan Files.